And we're live on Amazon. Woohoo!
Woohoo!
So on today's Book Chat Live, we have the amazing Gillian Whitney, who is all sorts of things. You are a LinkedIn live streaming expert, you're a book expert, and presumably you're also an avid reader too.
Huge avid reader. Love reading.
Okay, so shall we get right into it and start
Let's
with
get
the first
stuck in.
book? Okay. So, The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. So, why did you pick this book?
Oh, I love this book because she talks about, embracing our imperfections which is so counterintuitive, because I think for the most part, most of us feel, oh, we've got to hide that stuff, and yet our flaws can be our awes. They can really, truly be our assets. And knowing how to not try and chase the perfectionism, monster, that is what helps us move forward in our business. And especially if anybody who ever wants to write a book, you have to get rid of those perfectionist tendencies, especially because perfectionism is not a good thing. We think it is, like, oh, I'm a perfectionist. We kind of have it like a badge, like we're proud of, but it's actually about a procrastination. And so when I read that book, I got a really big aha that all those things I was talking about being perfect really were just a work in progress. And so that's why it was at the top of my list.
Okay, so this sounds like it kind of was something that, so was it before that you always wanted to sort of help people with books, but you didn't feel you were good enough? Or is this more at the start of your publishing journey? Where did this affect your life the most?
This sort of started, like, I was one of those people that was like writing a book for 21 years by not writing a book. And it was when I read Brené Brown's book that I kind of said, okay, it's time to stop procrastinating and get it done. And I actually, that's when I actually said, okay, I'm making the commitment to do this. And I love how Brené Brown talks about being wholehearted, which is sometimes you have to, if you find you're like messing around with time and stalling and procrastinating, just kind of questioning yourself and saying, okay, maybe I just need a break. Maybe that's why I'm sitting here scrolling through LinkedIn, or, maybe you're scrolling and watching cat YouTube videos. It's because maybe you need a break. So honor that, take the break, and then get back to work. We don't have to be like, oh, carry on, I have to work no matter what. So taking that wholehearted approach and then taking, that perfectionism and kicking it to the curb, that allowed me to write my first book. And now I've written 5 books. So I really can tell you it worked.
Yeah. Okay, shall we go on to the next book, which is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert.
Elizabeth Gilbert, I fell in love with her, as so many women do. We read Eat, Pray, Love, which was like always at the top of my list. And I love that book. And when she came out with Big Magic, I fell in love with this even more. And what I liked about it was, again, she talks about sort of, the tortured artist, and we're all walking around, being tortured. But she gave me a couple of novel things that I thought about. And one is that when we get a creative idea, and it could be writing a book, or it could be creating art, or it could be anything, quilting, whatever. But when we get the creative muse visits us, we think, oh, it's my responsibility to do this. I'm getting that inspiration. Whereas Elizabeth Gilbert says, it's kind of like the creative muse visits you and gives you those seeds of what you can do. But if you don't do anything with it, it just floats away and goes on to the next person. And that's why sometimes you'll say, oh, I had this idea for something and I didn't do anything with it. And then somebody else like publishes it, maybe it's like a product or even writes a book or something along that line. And I took that to heart, that it's like, I may have all these ideas, but they're not the right ideas for me. So send them on the way to somebody else and let me hone in on the ones that truly resonate. So that was one big aha. And then the other aha was, stop being a tortured artist. I love that. And she said, sometimes it's like we're envision yourself driving in the car and you've got, all these like negative Nellies in the front seat with you kind of going, oh, who are you to do this? And who are you to do this? And she says, tell them to get in the back of the car. They don't get to drive the car. They can be in the car, but they got to be in the back seat. They're not even helping you navigate. They don't get a chance to take the wheel. They have to sit in the back. And if they don't be quiet, you're going to actually stop that car and kick them out. So I love that idea too.
Yeah. So how did this affect your life then? Because I've gone with you, these first books are kind of the foundation for the rest.
Yeah, I think it was, again, I was going, when I read that book, I actually read that book before Brene Brown. So I read that book actually probably about 5 or 6 years ago when it first came out. And I remember that it was like, oh, I am good enough. My words do matter. I am creative, and I don't have to write the books that aren't resonating, because I was actually writing multiple books at the time, and I felt I should do this one. And I went, but I don't like that book. And you know what? We don't have to write the book that like would be perfect. Everybody says, oh, you really should write a book about that. And it was like, no, I didn't like it. So that began to get the wheels going with what books I did want to write. And I started writing them, but I didn't have the courage to really go that final stretch with the publishing. So it's like I kept half starting books and then I'd go on to other things. So it started the creativity, but it was Brene Brown's book that actually kicked me to the curb to get it done.
On to the next book, which is What to Do When It's Your Turn by Seth Godin. So.
I love Seth Godin. So I don't know if there's any marketers in the world that don't, embrace Seth Godin's. And I, first came to him through The Purple Cow, which was like an awesome book in itself. This one I especially liked because it was so different. This book looks like a magazine when you see it. Like, you open up, and I think he actually created it in design, and he wrote it himself. And I love that Seth, as big as he is, would do his own project like this. But I think what this book did for me was, it's all about not waiting for permission and wanting to just step up and don't wait for somebody to choose you. Choose yourself, pick yourself, do it. And there was one story in particular that resonated for me. And it was the story about the woman on the cover of the book. And I think her name's Anna. Oh, I forgot her name. It's Annie something or other. I think it was Kenny or something. Annie Kenny. And she was the poster child for the women's suffragette movement in the UK. And the story goes that she actually was at a meeting, and she was like 20 years old. So this is like in, sort of like the early 1900s, late 1800s. And she's at this meeting with Winston Churchill. And she stood up and she said, why can't women vote? And they said, sit down. They told her to sit down. And she just popped back up again. And they sit down, and she just kept saying, why can't women vote? And then they hauled her off and sent her to jail. And she went to jail for 3 years. Well, eventually, of course, women did get the right to vote in the UK, but it's because people like Annie that make a ruckus. And I love that phrase by Seth Godin, making a ruckus, and that we don't need to wait for it to be our turn. We can choose ourselves, pick ourselves, and be those ruckus makers. Maybe one day somebody will be talking about us and put us on the cover of a book.
Yeah, but try to avoid going to jail if you can.
Yes. Yes.
Right, on to the next one, which is How to Talk to Anyone, Anytime, Anywhere by Larry King.
Oh, okay. Larry King, growing up in the United States, and actually I'm from Canada too. So I was actually born in Canada and grew up in the United States. But I grew up watching Larry King, and I was always amazed to understand that Larry King is actually an introvert. I always thought he was an extrovert because he had such a great show. And I am an introvert, and I'm also a podcast host. And I remember when I started my podcast, I thought, I don't know how to talk to people. Like, when I go to a social event, I'm always the one that's kind of waiting for other people to talk to me. And I thought, I'm not really good at this networking thing, and I'm not really good at interviewing. And somebody suggested I read that book. And I went, well, that's kind of an old book. It's an oldie, but a goldie. I love that book. And Larry King goes through and teaches you how to be a good host, how to talk to anybody, whether you're talking about being at a networking situation or hosting a show like Larry King did. And it really came down to being curious. Being curious when you talk to people. And so when I host my LinkedIn Lives and my podcast, I don't show up with a bunch of scripted questions. Instead, I learn about my guest and I'm curious about what they have to say about things, as opposed to I ask a question and then I'm like, okay, waiting for me to ask the next question and not even listening. So I think that was what was gold about his book. So for anybody who is a little anxious going into social situations for work or for pleasure, that book really gives you everything you need to know about how to strike up a conversation, any place, anywhere.
Yeah, I think so much of communication skills are things that people can learn. I mean, I've learned as I've got older, and I think there's too many times when people think that their communication skills are something they're just born with and that's it. When it's like, no, you can learn all of these things. That's the thing.
Absolutely. You absolutely can learn. Here's another little gem from the book. He talks about how people are very uncomfortable with a pause.
Yeah.
And he talks about that, like when you're on the radio, that's like death to have a pause. But he says sometimes pausing really can make an effect. And I know I come from a Toastmasters background. And when I give speeches, sometimes I'll pause on purpose because it really gives people a minute to think about things. And it's good to think and pause and say something and then just kind of take a breath and let that sink in for the host, the guest, the audience, that sort of thing. And so that was another gem I got from that book, The Power of the Pause.
Yeah. Right. Should we go on to the next book?
Yes, absolutely.
Which is The Story Advantage by L.J. Bloom.
So her name's actually Lisa. So I'm not sure why she goes by LJ, but Lisa Bloom wrote this book, and it's a beautiful read. I've actually read maybe about 3 or 4 of Lisa's books, and they're so good, so good. And she is a storyteller. She's actually from Ireland. She now lives in Israel, and she's a storyteller, a professional storyteller by trade. And it was just like, oh, I want to be that when I grow up. I remember reading that title, just going, I'd love to be a professional storyteller. I think that's great. But she teaches business professionals how to craft a story to illustrate the points that you're trying to make. And anyone who is ever doing any kind of presentation, so whether you're on a big stage or even if you're just, in the boardroom or, you're giving a webinar or, whatever that could be, if we can craft a story, we remember stories, and it takes that really dry data where, you could sit with your PowerPoint slides and you got all these graphs and people are like, ooh, they're like just totally tuning out. But if you have stories, then that is the magic. And I like that book because people talk about it in many books, but they don't often tell you how to do it. And that's what I liked about her book. She teaches you how to do it. She teaches you why you should do it, but then she teaches you how to do it. And also how stories can be sticky and make your points memorable so that when people afterwards, they'll repeat the story and then they'll go in and they'll give the information that you shared. So I thought that was brilliant. I liked having the great how-to book, and she does a lot of great examples so that you can see, here's the story, here was the point. And I use storytelling every time I do something. It's like, I'll always figure out, I took this tip from Seth Godin. If you're ever going to do a presentation, figure out your stories first and then write your presentation to go with the stories. And I went, that's brilliant.
Yeah. Like telling you about my comments thing before the thing, I've got a comment and it's not showing up. So I might sort that out in the background. But yeah, I was going to say, there is something about books that tell you how to do things as opposed to, it's not that easy to say why you should do things. But to say why and how is actually quite rare in a lot of, certainly non-fiction books.
Absolutely. And I think it's often, I read enough books and some, if I don't like a book, I I never give bad reviews. If I don't like a book, I just move on. But some books I'll feel cheated in that I'll read the book and yes, I go along with it. And then the book ends. It was just like, okay, I feel like I just paid for a commercial to now go take your $5,000 course. So it's like, give me at least the high level of how I can do it on my own. If I need to work with you, I'll work with you, but at least give me those steps. So to me, that makes for a good book when, like you said, they show you why, and then at least show you the tenets of how to do it. Then you feel, I got my money's worth.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, we have got a comment. I can't put it up for some reason, but it is from Corinda Malfi, who said, I love it. I'm not sure if she's talking about the story advantage or the previous book, or she just loves the show. But thank you anyway, Corinda, for watching. Should we go to the next book?
I love that. And thank you for commenting. That was wonderful. We're glad you love it. So whatever you love, we love it too.
Yeah, right. Happiness is a Serious Problem by Dennis Prager. I love this title. I don't know. I've never heard of the book before.
It's a brilliant book. Dennis Prager is a radio host actually, I think he's not well right now. But anyways, he's a radio host in the United States, and he's had a show for years. And I used to listen to his show, driving around town. It was a talk show. And he's a very sort of, it'd be like if you're listening to your dad. He just kind of gives no nonsense advice. And I've always enjoyed listening to Dennis Prager. And I've read several of his books. And this one in particular, I picked it up because I just went, what is this title? I just found it was a curious title, which of course is probably a good tip for any book. Always make sure you have a book title that creates curiosity. But with this book, he takes a very novel approach to happiness in that he says, we are obligated to be happy. We don't get to cop out and just say, no, I'm depressed and miserable and yada, yada, yada. He says, no, you're obligated to fix your problem with being happy because you owe it to the people that you live with to be the best you that you can be. So just kind of saying, well, I'm not happy. And so therefore it's like I kick the dog, I yell at my husband, I yell at my kids. It's like, no, you're obligated to, be a better person for the other people in your life. And also too, it doesn't matter what happened to you. It's like your happiness is not a result of the circumstances. So yes, you may have lost your job, but you can still find reasons to be happy. You can have gratitude. And I've always believed in that too. And I found that whenever, and I'm going to be totally transparent, I've gone through periods in my life where I wasn't feeling very happy. And the way I always got out of those moments was some of the stuff that Dennis Prager says in this book was listing what are the things that you're grateful for. It's like having a list at the end of the day of the 3 things that were good in your day. That focuses on the positive because he talks in the book about the missing tile syndrome, that sometimes we look at our life and we say, oh, my life is great except for this. And we focus on the except for this. And it's like, well, what about the other 95%? And we're just not happy because, I have a wonderful family. I just wish I made more money. But it's like, but you got a wonderful family. There might not be people with a wonderful family. So I thought it was a novel approach. And every time I kind of start feeling mopey and sorry for myself, I go back and I read that book. And it's kind of a kick in the pants to, okay, get over it and get better.
So how many times have we read that book then?
I've read it 3 times.
Oh, okay.
And I think I'm done because I'm generally a very positive person because I found I can't lean in. If I lean into the negative, I just get more negative. So I kind of made a conscious decision the last time. And I think the last time I got depressed, it was because I wasn't well and I was frustrated with not being well. And I realized, you know what, even that is not a reason to not be happy. So,
yeah. Right. I'm going to try put that comment up. Hopefully, you might not be able to see it, but there, in the very corner, it's got the comment. So, right. Let's go on to the next book, which is The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. however it's pronounced.
I don't know either. Polo Colo. It's like
Yeah.
Marco Polo. I don't know. I've never kind of known either. So I
Yeah.
know every time I do it, I'm not 100% sure. This is a book that I have probably read. I've read this 2 or 3 times, and it's a classic. To me, it is a classic. I love it because of the message. And it's one of those books that's a fable.
Yeah.
And it's a story of a young shepherd boy in Andalusia, Spain, and he's looking for a treasure. And so it's kind of got, a little bit of everything in it. He's, of course, off on a journey. And it's kind of the hero's journey. We've seen the hero's journey in like The Wizard of Oz and Star Wars and all those other sort of good books, good movies. And this is the same thing. And I love this. I love the writing. I love Paulo Coelho's writing. It's like, it's just beautiful. And I remember I read this the last time I read this was during COVID. And I remember that I was in Israel at the time. My husband and I were in lockdown. We didn't have a television. So we were just like, well, what are we going to do with ourselves? And I thought, and I couldn't read any of the books because I couldn't read Hebrew. And so I was just like, I don't have any books with me. So I got this book. I just bought it on Amazon. And I thought, I'm going to just read it on my iPad. And I read it out loud to my husband. And it was just like something positive to get us through such a dark time. And it was a wonderful book to read together. And, we just absolutely loved it. But here was the message of the book, and I don't think it's a spoiler, is that sometimes the treasure that we're seeking in life is it's going to be a quite circular journey, and that it's probably you already have it, but you have to go through some change and discovery in your life to find it. So it's just a beautiful book. Everybody should read it. You should have a book club. You should give it as a gift. It's just one of those instant treasures and top of my list.
Yeah, I mean, I actually listened to the audiobook of this because somebody recommended this. I think on the first episode of this show, somebody recommended this book. And that's really good. I think Jeremy Irons narrates it or does something in it. Yeah.
Beautiful. And trivia tip is Paulo Coelho wrote that book in 2 weeks. He just sat down with pen and paper and he just wrote. And the book was inspired. The title of the character is Santiago. And it was inspired by another book in that Paulo Coelho read The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And that's where he actually got that character's name from. So books lead to books. And that's been a theme in my life too. If you ever read a book and there's another book mentioned, go find that book because there's probably a bit of a treasure in that for you too.
Well, it's also interesting because it's quite a literary kind of book. It's written in a kind of poetic way, but it's also accessible and has a story in it.
Exactly.
And that makes it quite rare, in my experience. It has all of those things together.
Because it's such an easy read. And it is a book that's easy to read out loud, whereas some books, they're just like, you really struggle. Struggle, but not with that one. That's just such a beautiful and easy read.
Okay, let's go on to the next book, which is another book that was recommended on the first ever show, which is The Midnight Library. So, why did you pick this book?
Again, this is, I actually listened to this book first. And, I think that's a great thing too, that like, you never know how you're going to want to consume a book. Some we like to listen to, some we want on an iPad, some we actually want to hold in our hand. So I listened to this book once on a car trip. I was going on a car trip. Somebody had recommended it, and I was like, oh, okay, this would be good. Highly recommend the audio. Whoever is the woman that reads this, she does a fabulous job. Beautiful voice. And that's important when you're driving because you want to have an audio book that doesn't put you to sleep. This is a fabulous book because it's all about, it's about books. So books about books always lights me up. But this is a book about a woman who's died and she's in between life and death. And she's at this library. And in the library is the Book of Regrets. And it was just like, that's saying to my heart, don't we all have the Book of Regrets where we've made a decision of should I have done this or should I have done this? But the book is about how she gets to basically go and see all those parallel lives that if she had made a decision. And that for me was magical, was like, yes, I do that to myself. There are some things where I say to myself, I should have done this, but I didn't. And that's really the message of the book. Yes, you could have done this, but you know what? You chose this route, which the ripple effect of those choices matters. And so I think that book was a very healing book for me in terms of realizing there's no such thing as a bad decision. We just make decisions that have ripple effects in our life.
Consequences, yeah.
Yes, yes. And that's one of those books where I loved it so much that I actually went out and I said, I must have the hard copy. I think I actually have the Kindle version too. So I have 3 versions of the same book. That's how much I love that book. And I've like highlighted it to death. Like there's just so many great quotes that, they're awesome.
Yeah, I've only listened to the audiobook, but similarly, yeah, it's really. I have recommended this book to people in the past because it's just especially for people who are non-fiction readers mainly. Strangely enough, I think coming over to this because it is fiction, but
It's fiction.
but it's got a message to it, and it's very well written. It's not. There's no like, oh, this is dragging along kind of thing.
No, no.
It all just works really well as a book.
It does. And I have to hand it to Matt Haig, who's the author. And I've read actually several of his books, so I highly recommend all of his books. But he struggled with depression himself, and he's actually written a nonfiction book about depression. And so I think that sometimes the pain of what an author goes through can come out in his fiction because it's a way of expressing that pain a different way. And I loved how this was one thing that like really impressed me with this book is that when the character is at the library where, she has access to all these different books with all these different parallel lives, she's playing a game of chess with a librarian. And I grew up in libraries. I love librarians. And I used to actually work in a library. So that kind of had an extra feeling to me. But they're playing chess. And I remember the librarian saying about the power of the pawn when you're playing a game of chess, that you kind of look at the pawn like, oh, that's the lowliest little, piece on the board. But it's not, because the pawn can actually be promoted to the queen if you get it all the way across the chessboard. And I know how to play chess. And I remembered that. And I went, basically the analogy is that as long as you keep moving forward, you are moving towards being a promoted queen. Yeah. And I love that idea. It's like we are not just little pawns. We have the potential for all of us to become queens. So I love that.
Anyway, shall we go on to the next book, which I think, back to non-fiction again, is... Oh, no, it's not. It's we're still in fiction. 11/22/63. This is very hard to say as an English person. By Stephen King. So, why this book?
Well, this kind of shows you that, like, okay, Gillian's different in that we never would imagine she loves Stephen King. I do. I love Stephen King books. I've read a lot of Stephen King, and it's like, even though it's the horror genre, it's good. It's good. I just love Stephen King. This one is not the horror genre. It was like, when I read this, it was just like, oh my goodness, this is a totally different book because it's all about time travel. Hard title, if you just go, it's the hardest title in the world because I don't remember the title myself because numbers, I think I'm dyslexic when it comes to numbers, but it's all about this history professor who is able to go back in time, and he realizes that he could go back in time, and what if he could prevent the death of John F. Kennedy? And the interesting thing is that he doesn't go back to the day when John F. Kennedy dies. He goes back like 8 years earlier and has to kind of hang out in the past to get to the point where John F. Kennedy dies. And it's just amazing in that this book, he has to go through this like portal, and it's like through a restaurant or something crazy, he goes through this portal, and every time he has to keep going through, the same thing, but then something happens and then boom, he's back to the present again. And he has to keep learning how to sort of dodge the car that's going to come around the corner. And he has to keep remembering. He has to figure out a way of living in the past. So he's like learns to like gamble and bet on like, the baseball games and stuff. So it's so clever. It's so intricate. But the big question is, and I'm not going to spoil it, is could you change the past? Can we change the past? And then if we can change the past, what are the ramifications on the present and the future? And so again, it kind of ties in all these themes together about what can we change and what can we not change. So it's a brilliant, brilliant book, and they turned it into an excellent miniseries as well. So I highly recommend it.
No, I have read this. I actually read it on ebooks, straight enough, not audiobook. So it's interesting, though, because Stephen King, on this show, I think he's had more books than anybody else. And he's written a lot of non-horror stuff. I mean, he's written writing books, he's written in other genres, and they've often appeared on here rather than his horror books, which I find interesting.
Yeah.
Right. Now, shall we go on to back to non-fiction again?
Sure.
Which is by this fantastic author, LinkedIn Live Guest Mastery by Gillian Whitney.
So LinkedIn Live Guest Mastery, yes, that was one of my books. I think that was my third book that I wrote. I'm kind of losing track. It was I think it was my third book. And I wrote that book after Uplift Live and in the UK. And it was all about just being a LinkedIn Live guest. And actually, it's applicable to anybody who's a live streaming guest, anywhere. It could be YouTube. It doesn't really matter. But that there's a way that you should leverage your guest appearances. And not only that, how can you be the best guest possible? Everything from having the right equipment and the microphone and the webcam and the lighting and the internet and all those different things. So this one, I really wanted to make sure, first of all, people would understand the power of building your brand when it comes to doing live streaming, because I don't have any notes here. Like I don't have a teleprompter telling me what to say. And maybe I've kind of messed up and said some things, but I'm honest and credible and human. And I think people like that. So that's why I feel every business professional should really master being able to talk live on a show just like this. And that's what I wanted to do with that book, is not only tell you why you should do it, but then I get into the how to pitch yourself, how to make yourself look attractive, and what to do after the show is over. All these things are so important. So that's everything I covered in the book. And a lot of the stuff that I talked about at Uplift Live is in the book as well.
Uplift Live is a LinkedIn event in the UK. Happening again this year, actually. So
yes.
Interested. Can you give us any of the secrets in the book here? Or do people just have to read the book?
Oh, no, I'm always happy to share secrets. So the biggest thing is that when you're going to be on a show, sometimes your host will give you the questions and sometimes they won't. And so you have to be ready for anything. So if the host gives you questions, then I suggest that you sit down and just say, how would I answer this? Don't write out a script. That's just going to totally stress you out. But maybe put some bullet points, some talking points of what you'd like to do. And then kind of bringing in some of the books we talked about early, the story advantage. Think about a story that would illustrate that point, knowing that it's sticky. People will remember the stories. And so you might say, okay, I'm going to talk about the importance of having good lighting. Maybe I better have a talking point about when I didn't do this correctly, and because I didn't have a backup, because one day that actually happened to me, my ring light broke. But I always have a backup. I have a second ring light in the box ready to go. So it's like if one doesn't work, I've got another thing. So having backup plans is really important, knowing your talking points, having some stories prepared, and then also helping to promote the event. So, when the event is over, go out and, share that you were on the show, do stuff. Those things are important as well. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. And always be an asset to the host and recognize the host is doing a lot to put this show together. So be appreciative and, help them market afterwards and thank them. That's a biggie.
Obviously, I'm very up for people doing that. We have a comment from Tanisha L. Curtis, who's an amazing viewer of the show. As an S-rank introvert, I find answering questions is 8 million times easier than coming up with topics. It's chopped easier off, so that's the best tradition of these things. But I think that's very true. And I don't understand. I mean, I understand why people want to script like recorded videos. I can understand that. But I think for most people, scripts are a terrible idea for anything that's remotely recorded, like interview-wise, because you sound like a robot unless you're very, very good.
You do. And if you're reading a teleprompter, I tried once to read a teleprompter and my eyes were going across the screen. You look sketchy. You look sketchy doing that. And you're right. You start flatlining how you speak. We all have natural intonations where sometimes we talk high, sometimes we talk low, sometimes we're loud, sometimes we whisper. So I agree, coming up. And also too, you can practice. Like for some people, they might say, I agree with what she just said, that it's like when people ask you questions, that's actually when your brilliance comes out, because you're just like, oh, I just have to trust my gut that I'm going to say the right thing. And we actually usually do. But we can practice this by just doing Zoom meetings by ourselves and just give ourselves 3 questions. I've done that where I've just prepared. I don't need to do it anymore because I'm on a live every single week. But when I didn't do that, I used to do things to help me prepare by just getting on a Zoom call and chatting and say, okay, let me tell you about my dream last night, or, just something like that, because it gets you comfortable just talking.
Yeah. Okay, on to the next book by another amazing author. Oh, it's by you again. From Expert to Author, How to Write Your Business Book by Gillian Whitney.
So this book is kind of a continuation of the last book, because if we have all this brilliance out there with LinkedIn Lives or YouTube Lives or podcasts, we've been a guest on all these different things. Well, you think to yourself, why let that waste? Why is it one and done? So I always tell people, repurpose. Take those transcripts, and that could be the seed of a book. That could be an article. And so when I wrote From Expert to Author, it was like, you already have this expertise. I talk in the book about don't be like me and wait 21 years to write a book. Write your book now, because people are waiting for it. And you don't have to be experts. That's a relative term. If you know something one step ahead of the guy behind you, you're an expert. You don't have to be at the top of the mountain. You can just be who you are today and share the lessons to either the people that are behind you that you could kind of reach out and help, or maybe it's to your prospective clients about what you could do for them, how you can work with them. So that's why I say, don't write your book from scratch. Don't sit there with the blank screen. Repurpose your existing content. And my book takes you all the way through it, from how to pick your topic, how to organize it, how to do everything that you need to do to get that book polished, written, and done. Not published. That's a whole other book that I'm working on next.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, to take is it a metaphor or analogy further, where often the person at the top of the mountain can't remember what it's like to be at the bottom of the mountain. So they'll be talking about how you need oxygen and about the clouds and the rest of it, when the person at the bottom of the mountain is interested in what kind of shoes they should wear. So often the person halfway up the mountain has more idea about what's relevant in a book.
I agree. I love that. And it's so true, because it's like you kind of have a foot in both worlds. You can see the top because you're getting closer. So you can see the top. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know until we're halfway up the mountain. And then hey, so what tips do you have? So maybe those guys are writing to you and you're the one writing to the guy at the bottom. But you're right. The people from the top to the bottom, that doesn't work. And I know I used to be a tech writer, and my job used to be working with computer programmers and taking their, how do you use this program, and putting that into information for the person who was going to sit down and type and, use the computers.
Yeah.
And these people could not talk. It was just like computer programmers spoke here, your end users spoke here, and I had to translate. I was like a translator, and that's how we have to look at stuff sometimes.
Yeah, we have another comment. Agree 100%. This is from Tanisha again. Agree 100%. I reuse content a minimum of 4 times per year. I don't know the way it's cutting it off, let's say. Meaning every time I create new content, I actually reduce my workload multiple times. She also says, fantastic mountain analogy. So, yes, I think we have some fans in the chat. Right. So we're going to the last book, which
Absolutely.
is actually Your Voice Matters, Present from the Heart by Tina Jarve and Gillian Whitney. So
there we go.
Talk to us about this book.
So this book also came out of Uplift Live. So 2 books came out of Uplift Live last year. And Tina and I were both speakers at the same conference. We were friends first and met for the first time speaking. Tina lives in Brussels. I live in the United States. So kind of meeting at a conference in the UK was kind of a cool thing. And basically what we did was in preparing to speak at the conference, we realized there's a book in this, because we worked together. We were excited. We were best friends, finally going to be able to meet at the first time. And we documented our process of, okay, how do you actually, how do you take all your ideas and put them together in one 30-minute presentation that's going to resonate for 200 plus people? And that was a big challenge, because it's like, okay, there are many different people going to be at that conference. How do we do something that, everything from the slides to the content, the nerves you feel? This was a huge venue with a screen that was an IMAX screen, 4 double-decker buses high. So it was kind of intimidating to do this. So we decided that after the conference, we had learned so much, and we went, it would just be so sad if we didn't put this content to use. And so we did it. And what makes, I think, this book very, very unique and close to my heart is that Tina is a sketch artist, and she's also a LinkedIn recruiter. So, sketch notes is kind of like her hobby. And every single chapter has a little drawing in it. And they act like as little like cheat sheets. So it's like you can look at the drawing and just see, oh, okay, that's how you calm your jitters before you go on and, talk on the stage, or this is what you should do the night before. Or here's how you should make your slides, do your colors, et cetera, et cetera. So it was just a brilliant book project to be a part of. And I'm so glad. And it's helping everybody all over the world. So it's kind of cool. So whether it's a big conference that you're speaking at or just in the boardroom, lots of great tips in there. Exactly. And that was, again, a situation where using video, we would get on Zoom. And after this conference was over, we actually just sat there and said, we better talk this all through or it's going to disappear out of our heads, while it's fresh in our heads. And we literally recorded those Zoom calls. And it was from that we were able to go ahead and have all the content as content to put in the book. And then of course you got to, make it into a logical sense. But that's something where if you ever go through an experience and you go, there's a book in this, record it before it, because that's what Elizabeth Gilbert would say. If you don't act on it, it just whisks away and then it goes and somebody else picks it up and they write the book.
Okay. So that's finished the book part of the show, but I have 2 questions.
Sure.
That I ask people. This first question developed over the years. It used to be a simple, if you had to pick one of these books, which would you recommend? But it's no longer that simple. Now I ask, because I think this is more profound, if you met somebody and you had to select one of these books to give to them, what would be the kind of like the flow chart on the logic process? What kind of questions would you ask them to work out which book amongst this cornucopia of books you would give them?
Wow, that's an awesome question. I think I would want to listen and learn a little bit about them first. And I think that my mom used to tell me, I had British mom.
Yeah.
My mom used to say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, because we're supposed to listen.
Yeah.
So I would want to kind of find out, I would probably be talking to them in a business perspective. And I would be probably asking about what's holding you back in your business. What do you want to achieve? And what do you think would get you there? And sort of find out, what are their stumbling blocks? What's holding them back? And I think we all have those. And I think based on getting those questions answered, I'd begin to learn a little bit about them. And then before I even suggested the books, I would also talk to them about, number one, do they like nonfiction or fiction? Because we talked about a lot of different books here today, and some people absolutely hate fiction. They don't want to read it. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, which kind of format, because it does matter. It does matter. So I would want to know, do they like fiction? Do they like nonfiction? And then I think I would just ask them, name me your top 3 books that you've loved that have made an impact on your life. Because I used to work in a library. So when people would tell me what book they liked last, and like, I'm looking for a book, I'd say, well, what have you already read? Because then I know, oh, okay, if you like Stephen King, then you might like Dean Koontz. I was able to always refer people, if you, sort of like Amazon, if you like this book, you'll like that book type of thing. So I'd want to know what their habits are. And then the third thing would be, how do you like to consume content? Do you like a book in your hand? Do you like an audio book? Or do you like, a digital book on the run? And that would be sort of how I would triage, and I would take all that information, and then I would make my recommendations.
And I said there were 2 questions, so I'll ask you the other one, which you kind of hinted at the answer to this, but what have you got coming up? Have you got a book? What is the next book you're going to write? And have you got a book? I'm putting an extra clause in. Have you got a book that you want to write, but you're not quite ready to write yet?
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's like a 2-parter. So if I'm okay, I'll answer it in 2 parts. So the first thing is, the next book I'm going to write, this is always what's so interesting. So the next book I was intending to write was a book about how to publish a book.
Yeah.
And I was just, I kind of got that half drafted, and I'm on target to like get that done by the end of the spring quarter, end of this spring, whatever, in the spring of this year. However, another book has jumped the line and said, I need to be written first, only because I keep getting asked the same questions over and over again, and I think it's pertinent. So I'm kind of halted that one and jumped on the other one. So I think sometimes that happens in life. You have the intention to do this, but something says, nope, pick me, and I'm going with the other one. So that's one. And that's actually going to be about, how do you choose what book you should write about? Because I'm finding that with clients, that they'll sit there and say, I know I have a book in me, but I think I have 5. And I don't know which one to write first. And so that's what that book is choosing that first book you should write. So that's what that one's about. The second parter is, you said, do you have a book that you want to write that, you're holding back on? Yes. I have a book I want to write, which is about moving to Israel. And I was living in the United States at the time. I moved to Israel just before the pandemic hit, and moved there with my husband, but like, we just got on a plane with like 6 suitcases and our dogs and moved there. And it was an incredible adventure. We were there for a year and a half. COVID was a terrible time to go. And, we became citizens and all sorts of stuff. I want to talk about that adventure because so many different things happened. And I just have notes and notes and notes because I documented everything. And that's a very personal book. But my challenge is, I'm not sure how to write it for an intended audience. I'm not sure who the audience is for that book. And so I don't want to just write a book to everyone, because if you write a book to everybody, you're writing a book to nobody. So I have to figure out who is the appropriate audience so that I can slant the writing of that book. So I'm struggling with that one.
Yeah, I know the feeling. A lot of books and things I have in my mind, but it's like, not quite ready or whatever. We have another comment from Tanisha, which is, lol, yes, That's exactly why I wrote Intro to Indie Publishing. I think this is about the people keep asking the same questions.
Yep.
So instead of having a 45-minute conversation.
Give them your book. What a great, and you think about it, a book, that you give to a client, it's like, that's an incredible thing. I like to call it a business card on steroids because they can get a sample of what you're like from your words.
Yeah. Well, I always, I'm going to go off on one of my rants, but I always tell people that there are generally two people making lots of money out of books, at least from self-publishing. People who are writing huge series of genre fiction and people who write books, generally non-fiction books, that then they sell set courses and higher value products from. And yeah, if you can give people a book and then they're like, oh, I want to hire you, pay you like $1,000 for a course on the basis of it. It doesn't really matter if you lose money on the book if you're making $1,000 afterwards. So.
No, and it also gives you the credibility to get in front of new audiences through podcast and different things like that. So it's like, you don't really make much money, and like you said, unless you become like, Stephen King, you're Brene Brown or Elizabeth Gilbert, those people, they're making a lot of money. But, the little guys, we're not making any money with book sales, but it still is something we want to do because it adds and makes us more credible and it gives us authority, builds our brand. It's so many great things what a book will do for you.
Okay, well, it's been great to have you on the show today, Gillian.
Awesome.
Can you tell us a little bit about you? How can people get in touch with you? What you do more generally? And your website and where the people can get in touch with you. I just said that, but yeah,
okay.
You know what I mean.
So anybody, my biggest social platform is LinkedIn. That's where I am. I love LinkedIn. It's a fabulous place for business people. I recommend everybody be a part of that. So please, if you saw me here, just go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. But let me know that you found me through this and I will connect with you. So that's one way. And I have a very open network on LinkedIn, so anybody can send me a message there. So LinkedIn, I also have a YouTube channel. I also have a podcast. My biggest thing is that I am a book coach and also a live stream strategist. And so I help people, build their business, boost their brand through books and video, because I just think those two things and books plus video is a wonderful combination. I am a podcaster. I have the Easy Peasy Books podcast, and I do that every Tuesday. And I do a LinkedIn Live that I repurpose as my podcast. And so please come join me. Tomorrow is, Tuesday, every Tuesday. I believe it's 10 a.m. in Pacific time, which makes it 6 o'clock in the UK. And I always have a fabulous guest talking about books. So whether it's writing or publishing or marketing, I have all sorts of different experts come on and talk about that. So that's the funnest thing. And then just connect with me on LinkedIn.
Thanks so much again for being the guest. And thanks for all the people watching, for Tanisha and Rinda for commenting. And yeah, thanks to everybody. It's been wonderful. Right.
This has been so much fun. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.